The desert was scorched by the sun until even the shadows pleaded for help. Her breath ripped through her as she ran barefoot. Like fire in the chest, blood smeared her legs where the cactus tore her skin behind her, and dust clung to her cheeks. The hoof sound continued to reverberate more loudly, nearer. The silence was broken by a gunshot, and she let out a dry scream. She didn't turn around. She was unable to. Isabel Alvarez was her name, and she had been fleeing from guys with badges but no souls for the last 2 days. When she tripped over a dead branch, the entire world shook. Her palm tore on the gravel as her knees struck the ground. Each breath had a metallic taste. Every step seemed like a death loan. She didn't see it until the horizon swam in waves of heat. An antique barn with a half-broken table, wood fences, and a ranch. There were only flies buzzing and silence, no soldiers or people. She crawled into the dust, dragging herself forward with trembling hands one after the other. Her lips cracked and her vision became blurry. Her voice was not as loud as the sobs coming from her gut. Her body gave up as she eventually came to rest under the broken table's shade. She attempted to raise it once again, but her strength failed her. As if it were the last solid object left in her life, her fingers gripped a splintered piece of wood. She briefly considered the possibility that dying here would be more peaceful than running. She heard the boots at that moment. Measured, slow movements without shouting or pursuing. She spotted a man standing a few steps away with broad shoulders, sunburnt skin, a face etched by years, and quiet as she approached him, and her eyes lifted. An axe, still wet from work, was in his hand. He didn't appear to be a soldier, but he did have a menacing appearance. The type of man who had hidden multiple secrets here. He moved forward a step. Her body would not budge when she attempted to crawl back. He knelt and put a hand towards her shoulder, causing her pulse to thunder in her ears. The terror leaped out of her breast. Her voice sounded broken, half pleading, partly whispering. "Be kind, it moves too quickly." The air between them trembled as the words hung in the heat. With his hand still hanging above her, the man froze, as though attempting to comprehend what kind of injury could cause someone to fear compassion. His gaze swept over her face. Sweat, dust, and a hint of human odor were all carried by the wind. Perhaps pity, perhaps regret. He lowered his hand and spoke slowly, his accent roughened by loneliness, his words weighty. "You are in pain." There was no question. Even so, she winced as though every word were a touch. He got back up, went to the barn, returned with a canteen and placed it next to her. He turned away after that. Just distance, no threats, no questions. Isabel gazed at the lake until she could no longer see her reflection clearly. Could she put her trust in a stranger who didn't ask her where she was from or ask for anything in return? She had never received anything from the desert without receiving twice as much in return. She groped for the canteen, her fingers shaking. The metal felt kind despite being warmed by the sun. She heard a horse's weak cry coming from somewhere behind the barn, coming from the creak of a wooden gate. The man was still there, either keeping watch on her or protecting her. Stories of cowboy love. She was unsure of which scared her more. Her voice broke once more, this time weaker and lost in the wind. "Who are you? And when you saw me, why didn't you leave?" The sun had softened by the time Isabel opened her eyes once more. The fragrance of old wood and hay filled the barn. Peace felt like another kind of trap, even though she was the only one being pursued for the first time in days. She sat up quickly, every muscle in her body screaming. The canteen was still beside her, partially empty. He hadn't retracted it. She noticed him repairing a rope close to the fence. He moved steadily and slowly at all times, as if he had long since given up hurrying. He nodded slightly when he saw that she was observing. Not much more. No threat, no smile. She was more perplexed by that quiet reverence than by any terror. The horse snorted because her stomach growled so loudly. She was torn between crying and laughing. She didn't decide. He returned to the barn and gave her a tin cup and a piece of bread. "Eat," he murmured in a gravelly voice. She took it after hesitating and trembling her fingers. It had a dry yet authentic flavor, as if it were intended for live beings. She whispered without looking up after taking a few nibbles. "You could have turned me in." Wiping his hands on his shirt, he uttered the words, "I could have. But I didn't," she scowled. "Why?" Before responding, he gave her a long look in Western stories. Because you didn't seek assistance. All you needed was somewhere to stop running. Between them, the words weighed heavily. For a long time, nobody spoke. Dust was thrown against the walls by the wind outside like sand-based rain. She got to her feet, still unsteady. Her gaze quickly shifted to the open door leading to the vast desert that lay beyond. Fear or freedom? It's really the same thing. She froze after taking 2 steps in the direction of the door. A weapon that was dangling on the wall caught her attention. Clean but ancient, perhaps load. Her heartbeat accelerated. Was this generosity genuine, or was it just a ruse masquerading as politeness? He saw that she was staring. Silently, he added, "You can take it if you want. If it improves your quality of sleep, shoot me." Uncertain if he was serious, she blinked. She had never been given that kind of option before. She turned her back as her throat constricted. She whispered, "I don't want to shoot anyone." He gave a shrug. "Then don't." Isabel lay awake on the hay that night while listening to the Wild West Stories podcast. She could see the moon, far away and silver, through the wool's fishes, as if it were keeping watch over them both. She jumped every time the door rattled, listening for voices, footsteps, or the pasta to find her again. However, the only sound she could hear was the steady, slow breathing of a man on the porch outside. He spent the entire night sitting there and listening to the sounds of the desert. By dawn, the question was more intense than hunger and seared in her chest. With a stranger sleeping in his barn, how could this man have maintained such composure? And behind those still eyes, what was he actually concealing? The morning arrived slowly and silently. The desert was broad and golden, the kind of dawn that appeared serene from a distance, but blazed with reality when you were standing there. Henry filled a tin cup with coffee and placed it next to the barn entrance. Sitting close to the wall, Isabel was already awake, and her eyes were red from yet another restless night. He uttered a single syllable, "Coffee," she mumbled as she observed the steam rising. "Thank you." Even when no one was listening, her voice still had the quality of someone who had mastered whispering. She briefly forgot she was meant to be terrified when the sunlight hit her face as she went outside. She nearly smiled, but then she noticed them. 3 equestrian males are observing from close to the barrier. This time there won't be any soldiers, just locals, but the kind who value conflict over tranquility. Loud enough for everyone to hear, one of them spat in the dust. "I suppose the elderly rancher enjoys having youthful, foreign company." Henry's mouth clenched. He didn't respond. Until they turned their horses and went off, he just gazed. However, the impression they left behind weighed more than dust. Isabel's hands clenched. "They despise me." Henry sipped his coffee slowly. "They despise things they don't comprehend." She chuckled wearily. "They must despise a lot of things, therefore." That almost made him smile. Sheriff's Wild West romantic films by noon. Dwayne arrived. "The cap is too white for honest work, but the boots are clean." "Heard you got a guest, Henry," he remarked, leaning against the doorframe. "And a nice one." Henry remained silent. The sheriff glanced in Isabel's direction. "You know the law says she can't be here." Henry gave him a direct glance. "I am aware that a man's home belongs to him according to the law." Like summer heat, the tension grew stronger. The sheriff grinned at last. "You always enjoyed testing the boundary. Don't let this devastate you." After that, he left with a tip of his hat. The ensuing quiet seemed to be more deafening than gunfire. Isabel watched the sun be swallowed by the horizon while sitting on the porch stairs that evening. Without looking back, she spoke. "They won't stop, will they?" Henry gave a quiet response. "No, but you won't either." The slightest smile curled her lips. She believed it for the first time. Something between them altered during that silent time. Not love just yet, but the beginning of something that could last in the desert. So before we continue, take a big breath, get yourself a cup of tea, or if you like, a little whiskey. Tell me what time it is in your location, and from where in the vast universe are you listening? Please subscribe if you're still with me, so you don't miss any updates on this story's development. Because what follows will put their hearts and the kindness of the entire town to the test. That day, the night fell quickly, dry and thick. The air had the smell of unfulfilled rain. Henry sharpened a knife while sitting by the fire, the sort of ingrained behavior males exhibit when they anticipate conflict. Isabel was using a lantern to try to patch a ripped sleeve inside the barn. Every time the wind forced through the crevices, the flame shook. A horse won somewhere in the dark, followed by another, and then boots on gravel. Henry raised his head. He simply listened and counted the steps without moving. 3, possibly 4 males. Too self-assured for travelers, too light for farmers. A voice garbled in the darkness as the door cracked open. Now let's see what the elderly man is concealing. It was one of the hateful, whiskey-intoxicated males from the fence. Behind him, the others chuckled. With the knife still in his hand, Henry stood. Henry, you don't own the girl. To the appropriate people, she is very valuable. Isabel emerged from the barn with the antique weapon before Henry could respond. Her eyes did not tremble, but her hand did. I'm not for sale, she muttered. The front man smiled. Sweetheart, you don't even belong here. He extended his arm to take her arm. The rifle butt crashed into his face the next second. There was blood. The others charged as he staggered back while cursing. Henry caught one in the jaw on his first swing. His shoulder ached, but he continued, his fists clenched in rage. Isabel let out one warning shot into the air and yelled. Like thunder, the sound sliced through the night. The horses fled in a fright. As they pulled their injured companion away, the men retreated while muttering threats. The only reason they departed was because the town took notice of the gunshot. Henry's labored breathing was the only sound to break the silence once more. Dust on his hair, blood on his temple, he leaned against the fence. Isabel rushed to him after dropping the weapon. She muttered, "Why did you fight for me?" He gave her a long look before responding. Because I'm sick of seeing decent people suffer needlessly. The scent of gunpowder and rain increased with the wind. They were standing in the dim light. 2 individuals who only had each other to lose. In that silence, trust started to take root. The desert, however, has its own secrets, and they weren't finished with the night yet. Because even though they believed the threat was past, there was still a deeper shadow lurking over the ridge. After a long night of solitude, the morning came slowly and golden. The storm was over. The scent of damp dust and gunpowder was still present on the ground. Henry looked out over the area that had already seen too much while standing at the porch with one arm bandaged. Isabel went outside behind him with 2 coffee cups. Her face has never been gentler or more serene. Without saying anything, she gave him one. For some time, they simply watched the sun rise over the ridge. There were no strangers, no soldiers, and no running, just the sound of wind over parched grass. Henry was the first to speak. If you'd like, you can depart today. Now the route is clear. She took a while to respond. Rather, she glanced down at her scarred hands before turning to face the horizon. I have spent my entire life avoiding people, suffering, and myself. Perhaps I should stop. He gave her a smile before remaining. It wasn't an order. It was a request. For a fresh start, for serenity, for something modest and uncomplicated that could at last mend the damage the world has caused. Weeks went by. Isabel learnt how to saddle horses, assisted with fence repairs, and occasionally laughed uncontrollably. Although the town's residents continued to murmur, their voices were no longer heard. Because judgment had nowhere to hide in the wide land, she gently questioned him one evening. Do you ever regret helping me? Henry paused to catch his breath before responding. Regret? No. In this world, we don't have many opportunities to do something right. When one appears, you seize it. With calm eyes, he turned to face her. You saved me too. You simply aren't aware of it yet, Isabel. Everything turned gold as the fields were bathed in the remainder of the day's light. Now 2 individuals who had before been strangers stood next to each other. Kindness created a force greater than fear, not because fate required it. And perhaps that is the lesson this humble little tale is trying to teach us. That sometimes a single act of kindness can transform a person's entire life. That love isn't always thunderous. Sometimes it just remains. Thus, prior to you, let me ask you a question. What time was the last time you took a moment to observe a person in need of some goodwill? What if that one tiny deed could alter everything? If this tale caused you to feel something, pause to give the video a like and forward it to someone in need of a little optimism today. Additionally, subscribe if you haven't already, so that you can come along for the following tale, in the untamed center of the West. Now pour yourself a cup of tea again,